Are humans any different from ordinary animals? Lately, it has become very popular to view humans as no different from brute animals, to such an extent as to reject any notion of free will whatsoever. This view is sometimes referred to as determinism, and in this video, we will distinguish it from the classic understanding of free will. But first, as always, we start with our mission. Today we're discussing man's power of free will. Do humans have the ability to pursue that which will make them happy? Or are we no different from animals which respond to stimuli in their environment? If we learn this faith, if we live this faith, if we share this faith, what will the next 100 years look like? Join the mission. If you missed the previous videos, this is part 3 in our book study on Christian social principles by Sister Mary O'Brien OP. You can get a copy of this book over at Sophia Press, and you can see the previous videos over on our channel page. In the last video, we discussed this concept of exodus and redditus that Sister discusses in chapter 2. It's this movement from God back to God, that everything has come from God and everything is returning to God. And everything in creation makes this movement according to its own nature. So a dog barks and a duck quacks, and this movement is different in the different things in creation. Now, in this video, we're going to discuss chapter 3, where Sister differentiates this action or this movement back to God in humans, rational creatures, and everything else in creation, in material creation, that is non-rational. So whether that be, she's going to use examples like the sun and stars, she's going to use examples like dogs and plants. All of those things are non-rational, and we're going to break that down a little bit more. So this movement back to God in humans is characterized by the pursuit of happiness. Man acts by pursuing what will make him happy. Happiness is the cause of all of his actions. She says that objective happiness consists in the possession of the thing desired. So we recognize that there is something that we desire, but we're not happy until we possess it. And she uses the example later in the chapter of a steak. It's not the steak on the menu that makes you happy. It's not the ordering of the steak. It's when the waiter finally brings the steak and puts it in front of you and you're able to enjoy it. That's when you have achieved happiness. Now, she uses this as an analogy. Our ultimate happiness comes from the possession of God. But all of these things that we engage in, all of these acts that we're pursuing in our lives, they're all steps to that ultimate happiness. And each one of these acts is a pursuit of happiness. Now, that's not what we see in non-rational creatures. She's going to use the example of the sun shining and stars twinkling and plants producing fruit. All of these things do this according to their nature. Now, you may say that there's no purpose, there's no intention in the creature to act in that way, but if there was ever a plant that was not actually producing fruit, we would all recognize that as abnormal or strange, and we would call that plant a bad plant, or we sometimes will call ourselves bad plant keepers. Every time I have a plant, I kill it. I don't water it or whatever. But anyways, we recognize that there's something abnormal about that circumstance, that this thing should normally do this function, that's its normal end. However, these things, these actions which these non-rational creatures engage in, they don't have the ability to pursue that end rationally. They're not making a choice of their own free will to do this. It's what they do by nature regularly. So she says rational movements can never come from irrational beings. So this is an indication that there is a God who has put in the nature of these creatures this end that they will work towards. And then when they don't, if they should not achieve their end, then we recognize immediately this is an abnormal thing that's occurring. This thing is supposed to produce fruit. We recognize that it's acting outside of what would normally make it to be good, make it to fulfill its end. Now, this act is prompted by nature. It's not something that's initiated by will. For example, a dog, she's going to use an example of a dog. A dog is going to seek food when it's hungry. It's going to seek water when it's thirsty. And it does this according to memory or previous learning. It has learned in the past that when I'm hungry and I go to the food bowl, if there's food there, that will satisfy my hunger. If I drink water, that will satisfy my thirst. There's learning, there's memory. There's not a series of events in which the dog is planning out. There's not a long sequence of events. I can give the example here. I had this occur yesterday. My dog Gabby, she loves to play frisbee, and whenever you hold up that frisbee, she goes nuts bouncing all around. When you throw the frisbee, she gets the frisbee and she wants to bring it back to you so she can do it again. And this will go on forever until she's exhausted herself, and she'll still go after it. So my dog is also afraid of garden hoses. She's afraid of getting washed. So yesterday I had the unique circumstances where I was filling up the water bowl and trying to play frisbee, and it occurred to me that she was not going after the frisbee in this circumstance. Why wasn't she? Well, I was holding the garden hose. Now, if you compare her emotional response to both of these things, she really loves the frisbee. It's the greatest thing in the world to her. The garden hose, she slightly dislikes the garden hose. I wouldn't say she hates the garden hose like she might hate, a grizzly bear that's mauling her. It's not that severe. She just kind of dislikes getting wet. But I found it interesting that no matter how much she loved the frisbee, she still would not approach because of the garden hose. It's like this thing did not outweigh that thing. Because she was not planning, she was not going through a sequence of events of planning, we would do that. Humans would do that. She would not say, oh, let me see if I can bear a little bit of water so that I can play frisbee, which I really enjoy. She just would not approach. And there was no amount of throwing the frisbee or waving the frisbee in the air that would get her to come towards me while I was holding the hose wasn't even on. I was just holding it. I was amused by this whole thing. That's not the way humans act. Humans act when we pursue our ends or when we pursue our goal. We engage. So if there's this final goal, she's going to use the example of going on a trip. And let's say you're afraid of flying. So, if you're going to Rome, I think this was a really good example because whether you're afraid of flying or you just dislike being in small spaces, if you get on a flight to Europe, you're going to be stuck on that plane for 11 hours or 15 hours or whatever it is, and you're stuck in this tiny little space, and it's a very, very, very undesirable, occurrence there, but we still engage in it. If we want to go to Rome, we have to save money, make reservations, get a passport, pack everything, try to get everything in the little suitcase. So, they'll let us check our luggage and all that stuff. And then you get on the plane and you're stuck in this little seat. This is something that is very it's analogous to the garden hose. It's like getting sprayed with the water. The dog does not want to experience that. But we, unlike the dog, we bear with it because we know at the end of the sequence of events is this final goal, and the attainment of that goal is going to make us happy. So in that shows us right there that humans have a free will, that we're willing to engage in these actions that are unpleasant. So humans are the only creatures, material creatures, that can choose to follow the promptings of nature as we head back towards God, as our nature is fulfilled, heading back towards God. Humans are the only material creatures that can choose to follow that prompting or to ignore that prompting. And perhaps we'll do it because we misapprehend happiness, or we decide we don't want to get sprayed with the garden hose or get stuck on an airplane or whatever the case may be. Now, Sister's going to explain how the soul operates, how the soul makes an act of free will. So she explains that the intellect are the soul's capacity to know things. The intellect will recognize a thing as good. For example, it will recognize that a trip to Rome is a good. It's something that I should desire. The intellect will present that to the will, the capacity of the soul to desire things. That's the act of the will. The will may desire it or it may not desire it. For example, it may desire to go now because now the airlines are having a sale, or it may not desire to go now because of some international occurrence that's going on, and now's a bad time to fly. But the will is going to desire it or not to desire it. Now, if the will desires this trip to Rome, the will, guided by reason, will pursue that and all of the steps along that path. So the will pursue all of the little steps, the saving money, the getting a passport, the packing, all of those little steps, getting on that flight, so that with that end in mind, that once we have achieved that end of getting to Rome, when we possess that, then we'll be happy. We'll possess happiness at that time. Now, she calls in the chapter, she's going to refer to this as a deliberate human act, which is different than the acts of non-rational creatures. We will call this the act of the free will, that the intellect recognized something that was good, and the will desired it and pursued the steps along the way to achieve it. Now, she's going to, at the end of this chapter, she's going to hint what's coming in the next chapter, in chapter 4. She's going to mention that we call these acts good or evil based on whether or not they fulfill or they frustrate man's nature. If they fulfill man's nature, if this movement fulfills man's nature, then we call it a good human act. However, if it frustrates man's nature, we call it an evil human act. And we'll discuss that when we discuss chapter 4 in the next video, which you can watch by clicking right here.